Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order and have Karen Buffkin call the roll.
Chairman Balducci,
Here.
Regent Yang,
Here.
Chairman Guay,
Present.
Regent Santiago,
Present.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Right now, I'd like to make a motion I make a motion to accept the minutes of the last meeting, May 14th. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you for that. Ted, all those in favor, any comments, questions about it? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Nays? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. The minutes are adopted. On this, we have a couple of items here. And one deals with tuition at Charter Oak and a pilot program. What I'd like to do is amend today's agenda to add two things. One, a resolution regarding a similar pilot program for Central with the Connecticut Nonprofit Alliance. And I guess that's all we have to amend because the other one is there. We only have to amend one item. I would make that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion made and second in discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed. Thank you. Okay, that is now added to our agenda. I will call on Mike Moriarty, Ed Klinowski to make comments
On the Charter Oak,
on Charter Oak.
they are both on, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Resolution before us, I'd like you to explain. My major concern is cost. What is this going to cost? Although it's a pilot program, it still costs money.
Well, actually, it saves money. Every student we recruit through a corporate agreement has no cost of acquisition, which for us is about $2,500 per student. So the way we typically market is one student at a time. This is students in bunches. This is the marketing of the future. We don't do it real well, but we're trying to. Interestingly, this group came to us, this Ask Me Local. We made the agreement. Now Council 4 wants the same agreement, and National Ask Me wants the same agreement. So theoretically, this could bring hundreds, if not thousands of students to us because we have an advantage over the other institutions who have similar deals. And by the way, that's Southern New Hampshire, Western Governors, et cetera. We actually have Ask Me employees. So for Charter Oak, this is not just a corporate agreement, and we can talk about those in general. It's a particularly unique corporate agreement. And my argument to you would be, I'm not sure why you're approving one small agreement instead of approving this in principle so that we can do the other two contracts that are already in the queue. So there is no cost to doing this other than the discounted tuition, which we do on a regular basis. And the savings is $2,500 per student, so we do not have to spend the recruitment costs on. Michael, you want to add or subtract anything from what I said?
Sure, I could set the stage a little bit. So specific to Charter Oak, we have about 200 students that receive discounts through various corporate partnerships. And so when we budget institutional aid, kind of comes in a couple different buckets. One would be merit-based bucket, one would be need-based buckets, and then the third would be corporate partnerships. So that institutional aid profile for Charter Oak, we award about $2 million of that, and that goes through the spending plan, and it is approved by the board. I think it's important to note that institutional aid is completely funded by the institution. It supplements Pell Grants, it supplements loan dollars, but it effectively reduces the out-of-pocket costs for our students. So this has been a critical strategy of ours, both in the past, current, and what we want to continue into the future. So I had, through discussions behind the scenes, it seems like there was an appetite to bring these to light on an individual basis. So I'm happy to do that. But again, we have about 200 students through various arrangements in the past who fall underneath this. And just to echo President Klinowski's commentary, the cost of acquiring a student is between $2,000 to $3,000 when you factor in marketing and everything else. When you have corporations who align with your programs and they are happy to promote your programs internally to their workforce base, it does have a savings in that we are able to effectively reduce the net tuition to that population. That's what this serves to do. So the agreement in front of you today is a relatively small population. It relates to the local ASME groups in the state of Connecticut. We've been asked by the National ASME Union if we'd like to enter into an arrangement so they could deploy this nationally. As President Klonowski said, there are other, especially online institutions who do this. I guess my final commentary would be just to solicit some feedback from the board on, knowing that this is a strategy of Charter Oaks, and I'm sure it will be, or currently is, the other institutions as well. How much information would you like us to provide? Would you like everything on a contract by contract basis, or would you like to see institutional aid? Obviously, it's part of the annual spending plan. I want to make sure the board is comfortable with what we're doing and just to keep you in the loop as much as you need to. So I'll stop there for commentary and happy to answer questions.
We have any questions by Mr. Chairman?
Yep. Mike Cadet, thank you. I'm not as familiar with this, so I apologize if this question has already been answered, but is this program, strategy, direction in any way competitive with our community college system or our four-year regionals?
To give a straight answer, not directly. A good portion of the current students that we bring in under this program are through national alliances. So what a lot of corporations typically do is they align themselves with an HR vendor who then goes out and solicits corporate partnerships from higher ed. And that's the majority of our students. There's likely to be some overlap within the state of Connecticut. Now, I know, for instance, we have an agreement with Hartford Healthcare, and I believe others do. And so there's going to be a little bit of overlap with programs that overlap. But I would say, at least for Charter Oak, the majority of these items would not provide any direct competition, any more so than what we're kind of typically used to.
Okay. I just want to make sure we watch this and make sure that we don't compete with ourselves and fill a space that we're not filling. I understand that. And I understand sometimes the marker goes over the line a little bit sometimes in life, but I don't want any material competition. So asking you and Ed watch this and report back what you're seeing, because we want to make sure that our in-class regional education and community college education also thrives.
Yeah. If I could follow up on one item on that, one thing I could absolutely commit to is I'm happy to share this with my peer CFOs just to make sure, no one feels out of the loop. But Charter Oak does provide a small program base when you look at how we compare to the other institutions within the system. So I actually think the leveraging of some of these agreements in the future could provide gains for everyone. And I'm happy to kind of give that inventory up to everyone in the system.
Yeah, let's share that. That's a good idea.
Any other comments, Ted?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. I just want to address the comment made by President Klonowski that, why are we doing this as a one-off? And I think Chair Gway did allude to, we do want to make sure that this works well for the system, not just for Charter Oak. I have in the past commented that, we need to up our game in terms of how we market and how we do partnerships. So I actually think it's a great idea to do these types of things. But of course, I think it's relatively new for a lot of our schools to do this. So I think doing this in a measured fashion, excuse me, is not wrong. But I do understand your frustration. And I will point out that I think more than a year ago, when this was happening under BISC, I did point this out, that we want to look at these types of arrangements. And at that time requested that we take a look at our signing authorities. That was, of course, ignored and not done. So unfortunately, we are where we're at. So I think it is this board being given insufficient time to review these types of things. I found out about this because, as you both know, I was physically with you at your commencement. But hey, you know what? I think it's a good idea, but unfortunately, the board was not given any amount of time, and nothing has changed. Therefore, we are unable to do this, I think, and it would be almost reckless to, on the fly, implement a broad-based policy, when instead we should do that more measured and through analysis to make sure that it does not place an undue burden either on the board or on our schools. So I share your frustration, and I think we just have to walk this forward before we can do this more systemically.
One of the comments I think in alluding to is this is a 1-year pilot, if you wish to look at it that way, which makes it a little easier for me to look at, because I'm still not certain of the costs and the number of people involved in this, Ted. But we have this one, and we now have the one from Central. So I don't have an uncomfortable feeling about moving this now for a 1-year trial or pilot program. And I would look for support from people like you and other members of our committee, since it is a 1-year. If it was longer than that or indeterminate, I would be against it. But I think finding out the number of students, finding out the cost, although I've heard it said that it doesn't cost us anything, I have yet to be in that seat where it doesn't cost us anything when we do something. So I'd like to, appreciate your comments. And I would say that any other comments on this? Otherwise, I'd like to move it along. Any other comments, Michael?
Chair Balducci, just a follow up. So the actual discount specific to this arrangement that you would be approving would be $400 per student on average. And so that represents about a 25% discount. We actually would not have any marketing costs associated with this. So any net gains in enrollment would be, our margins would be significantly greater than what they would normally be. One of the two other comments I will have, actually one comment and then one bit of homework if the board is okay with it, that I will take away. One comment would be is that, yes, if it is approved for a year, that is great, and we are very appreciative of that. One thing that I do have to do in terms of advocating for our students is that if they do have supporting mechanisms that reduce the cost in year one, and it takes them 3 to 4 years to earn their degree, I will be advocating to continue it in the future. Just as a heads up, just so you know that I do have to advocate on behalf of the students in that regard. However, just knowing that, hearing the board's commentary, what I would like to do is take away and work with the other CFOs and produce a process that perhaps we could give back to the board and the system, so that everyone is comfortable with this. Because if these programs expand and latch on, you may have dozens of these in the future. And if the major concerns are non-competition with each other, not cannibalizing different program enrollments, I'm sure myself and my peers could find a process that does the legwork ahead of time instead of having that burden shifted to the board.
Good idea.
I would appreciate that.
Ted, you were commenting?
I'm just saying I would appreciate that. Thank you, CFO Moriarty.
Ari, comment? Ari? Ari, are you on mute? Because we can't hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I thought I was, no worries. Sorry, I thought I took myself off mute. CFO Moriarty, I was trying to understand, these students, some of them are all from Connecticut, some of them are out of Connecticut. I was trying to understand that from earlier. Could you just maybe refresh for me where these students would be coming from?
Sure. This particular agreement, it is expected everyone would be from Connecticut. There may be some folks across the border in New York and Massachusetts, depending if they commute into the state of Connecticut for work purposes. President Klonowski was approached by AFSCME, the parent organization, for this particular agreement, noting that, hey, we appreciate everything you're doing for our local folks. We do have a need nationally for this as well. So that is not the agreement in front of you. But there would potentially be national agreements in the future that would include out-of-state residents, at least for Charter Oak, taking online classes, which is still a minority for us, but not uncommon.
Okay,
Ari?
so I think I missed that. So the national opportunity is an in the future opportunity, not part of this. I missed that. Okay, I appreciate that. I appreciate that clarification. And then one further clarification is what we're concerned about from a cannibalization perspective is the idea that somebody who would be doing an in-person class at one of our other institutions might convert to online because of this program. Is that the sort of concern that we're discussing?
I guess I could start. I don't particularly see that because when a student starts on ground, they typically prefer for on ground, and a student, who starts online would prefer online. I think the agreement, I would have to go back to the counterparty to see how many actual potential students this would apply to. But this is a relatively small agreement in the grand scheme of the equation. So specific to this particular one, I would not expect any cannibalization whatsoever. But as I mentioned before, I think there is a process that we need to undertake and propose to the board of how do we do this in the future, especially for the schools that are significantly bigger than us. If right now we have a good portion of students who are, I'll say, through the pipeline of corporate arrangements, this could be a big enrollment win for everyone across the CSU Institute, but aligned with corporate partners who align with their programs. Every school having a different menu of programs, of course.
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman?
yeah, thanks, Mike. My comments were born out of really a lot of discussion that happened during and after our online task force that Regent Yang led. I think the task force did a lot of work, but what came out at me after a lot of consultation and consideration with faculty, with people across our institutions, is that when we delve into this area, it is probably an area of value for us, but we want to make sure we're synchronized with all of our in-classroom institutions as to what it means, how we do it, how well we do it, and have their voice at the table. So from my perspective, your offer to share this with your peers and the institutions is quite helpful. This is a ring-fenced pilot, so it doesn't commit the institution longer term. We're going to learn something. We don't think it's going to have an impact, but I think we want to make sure we're collaborative in this moment, because while Charter Oak has a real space to operate in for students that really value that offering, we have a much bigger group of people utilizing our other offerings. So I just want to be synchronized here and eyes wide open as a team,
And I think since it's limited, Mr. Chairman, we will find out if there are any ruffles or things that may not be working properly. And it's a limited time, it's a 1-year deal. So we'll find out if there are any problems or anything else that may cause issues if we move forward with this in the future. Ari, you have your hand up still, or is
Professor Cunningham.
Professor Cunningham?
Thank you. I'd like to just second Chair Guay's perspective on this matter. I think the development of the PACT expansion to the CSUs, which was an AAUP CSU initiative, which benefited Charter Oak, shows that we are on board, with the idea of working collaboratively and expanding wins across multiple campuses. And we should keep that spirit when it comes to anything like this. So thank you, Chair Guay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Ed, did you have your hand up again? No? Okay, we'll be voting on this item. We have to vote on it next week. We don't have to do it. This is just an informational discussion, and hopefully next week before the board, it'll be presented again, and we'll take action on it. It looks like we've got enough support to move it forward as a pilot program. The other item we had before us deals with Central, informational, but we'll be voting on this also next week. And with that, I turn to Avogato Buffkin.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And President Toro, I see that you're on. If you want to add anything to this, please, feel free to jump in.
Thank you, Karen.
This is an agreement between, this is a resolution to approve an agreement between Central Connecticut State University and the Connecticut Nonprofit Alliance. It also provides for, that agreement provides for a 5% tuition discount and a tuition deferment for students that are coming from institutions that are part of the Connecticut Nonprofit Alliance. One of the things that I would like to note, if you look back in the archives of the board has the authority to set tuition and fees. And so any of these agreements that actually impact the tuition rate that is being charged to our students versus those that have are institutional aid based on either merit or financial need have typically been approved by this board and in resolutions through time. Central has one that was approved back originally in 2020 that goes through December of 2026 with Bright Horizons, which includes a corporate tuition discount for Otis, Raytheon, and UTC. And so these types of agreements should be coming through the board for approval. Secondly, both resolutions, as a result of conversations internally with leadership at the system office, as well as the regents, both resolutions provide for the creation of a working group that will include the CFOs as well as other leaders at the institutions and staff within Lloyd's shop and involving the provosts so that we can look at what are the impacts of these agreements writ large. What are the costs? What are the savings? Do they increase enrollment? Do they do what they are expected to do across the board? And with a report back to the board if these are approved on January 2nd, 2026. So there is an intent to look at these holistically and if appropriate to set, sort of a guideline that the institutions can work under that the board has approved.
And this is similar to the other, it's a 1-year pilot or whatever, so we'll have time to look at it, make decisions as to what needs to be added or deleted, if any, at that time. Comments?
May I add some things? These agreements also open the door for us to expand the internship opportunities for our students. And these agreements are for our graduate programs. And I think that this has been discussed before. We have a fixed cost when we open a graduate course that we need to offer. If we add 2-3 more students to that course, the students that are already in the course are paying for the cost. Everything else that comes from these additional students is income that is in addition to and help the financial situation of the university. So the internship opportunities is very important for us. But the other thing is that when we establish this type of partnerships with companies, the philanthropic arm of those companies are more inclined to contribute to our fundraising efforts if we have this type of partnerships. And finally, in the effort of establishing our workforce and innovation hub, having these partnerships is at the heart of what we are doing with that hub. So, and our competitors are doing these kind of things. So all around, I think that this is a very good strategy that at the end of the day, I agree with my Charter Oak colleagues. It doesn't cost the institution. On the contrary, it makes the institution more competitive and open doors for additional revenue for the institution.
Thank you, President Toro. Other comments? I just like the idea of working together with major corporations. We end up having them not locked in, but we have them as support as we go forward for future endeavors. So I think that's a positive. Marty?
Yeah, I want to thank you, Dr. Toro, and your provost. I read through the agreement. I like the optionality. I like the direction. I think I have a lot of confidence in how you contextualize these opportunities within the system and the institution. So I think this is an opportunity for us. We're going to learn a lot, and I know that we have a one-year agreement here per the document that we can re-up. So I'm excited about this.
Other comments? Dr. Cunningham, do you have your hand up?
I think that remained up from the previous time.
Okay, no other comment? No other comments? Okay, so this will be the other item that we discussed before our board meeting, and we'll be voting on it next Thursday. Thank you for your input on all of that. I think these programs will be interesting. Seeing the results of them over a year, I think is going to be important. Moving right along, the next item on the agenda is the CSCU spending plan for fiscal year 26. At this point, 26, 27 actually. At this point, I'd like to call on our main person here, Dr. Blanchard, to run us through the spending plan.
Thank you, Chairman Balducci. Good morning, Regents. Good morning, staff, colleagues. This is our presentation, our annual presentation for the coming fiscal year, beginning on July 1. This is for FY26 only. Now, this slide, in this presentation, I hope to remind Regents, students, and the citizens of Connecticut of the tremendous value proposition that attending a CSCU institution provides. In 2024, we served over 77,000 students. That's nearly 40% of all Connecticut college and university students across the state. We serve twice as many students as the state's flagship university with fewer budgetary resources. So as a system of 6 institutions, we are more efficient. I will walk you through with this presentation the budget and enrollment trends before presenting the state adopted appropriations for CSCU and the institutional spending plans. The sheer number of students our faculty educate and graduate each year truly makes CSCU the workforce engine of the state. In 2023, you can see that our faculty awarded almost 14,000 degrees, comprising 60% of all degrees provided or awarded by Connecticut's public universities and colleges. Increasingly, press accounts and public commentary question the value of higher education. With this slide, I hope to remind Connecticut students that a college degree from a CSCU institution has tremendous value. Indeed, the best economic research suggests that higher education is one of the best investments a high school graduate or a state can make. Over a 4-year career, the return on investment from graduating from a CSCU institution ranges from $1.5 million to $2 million. The full return on investment, that is not only just the private returns, but the social returns, the market returns, and the non-market returns, is estimated to be between 14 and 18%. It is difficult to find investments on Wall Street that produces these kinds of returns, speaking to the strong results that higher education produces when a student graduates and strong benefits to the state for the same. However, the same economic research reveals a fundamental challenge in higher education that we must address. That is the cost of higher education. Over the past 40 years across the nation, average household incomes have doubled, while the cost of higher education has quadrupled. This is a challenge we plan to address here at CSCU. Over the past few years through this biennium, this slide shows the cost mitigation efforts that we've undertaken and the planned mitigation efforts for the coming biennium. The projected deficits for FY26 and 27 are largely the result of a loss of $138 million in one-time funds. We knew this time was coming, which is why we set aside reserves to prepare for its arrival. Now that the one-time funds are gone, our proposed spending plans will show how we plan to utilize these reserves to close gaps between revenues and expenditures. This slide shows the history of our budgets over the past 13 years. What is striking about this graph is the stability between revenues and expenditures before FY20 and the instability of the revenues and expenditures after FY20, after the pandemic. From FY13 to FY19, revenues grew by 3.4% annually. Expenditures grew by 3.6% annually. After FY19, revenues fell by 1.2% annually, and expenditures grew by 0.5% annually. This incorporates the wage and non-wage inflationary pressures that our budgets face. So after the pandemic, these small these decreases in revenues and small increases in expenditures count for the absorption of those inflationary pressures. So we have to cut our budgets, in effect, to absorb the inflationary pressures, whether they come from wage increases or non-wage inflation. This slide shows the enrollment trends for our universities.
So,
is there a question?
Just a roaring bear.
Oh, Bear? Welcome to our meeting, Roaring Bear.
No, I think if I could just jump in, President Klonowski's having a computer issue. So if there's a way to mute him on that side, he's working with our IT department.
Thank you, Michael. So before the pandemic, our universities faced modest enrollment declines. You can see on the left-hand side of your slide, those declines range from 1% to 1.5%. However, after the pandemic, all of our universities except Southern faced accelerated enrollment declines. Fortunately, Southern's enrollment decline fell. So they did something good down in New Haven to shore up the general trend that we saw here in Connecticut and that was seen across the nation. This slide shows our enrollment trends for the past 13 years for our two colleges. Now, the two lines that I'm showing show both CT State credit enrollments, as well as CT State non-credit enrollments, as well as Charter Oak at the very bottom there. Before the pandemic, CT State faced 3.2% declines, and after the pandemic, they faced a smaller decline. So that's good news, given where they were before the pandemic. However, after the pandemic, CT State faced larger declines in their non-credit enrollments. Unlike all of the other institutions in our system, Charter Oak has been growing ever since, slightly before the pandemic and significantly after the pandemic. As you can see, this plus 5% is a plus 5% growth on annual growth on average.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You go back one.
Yeah.
How does this, I mean, should we congratulate ourselves because the rest of the world is down more dramatically, or are we in line? Are we regressing to the mean here? What's the perspective outside of the system in terms of context?
I don't know the numbers specifically. Connecticut has faced, because it's in New England, larger declines than other parts of the country, largely for demographic reasons. So the fact that all of the acceleration of declines, well, let me say it this way. All of the declines before the pandemic were unique to certain regions.
Yep.
Across the country after the pandemic, everybody saw declines. Flagship universities, though, did see some increases. Online universities also saw increases.
Okay.
How about the UConn, for instance? Is there any ideas how they fare compared to this chart?
I don't know the specific numbers with UConn, but we did see enrollment increases at UConn. You have to understand, with flagship universities like UConn, they turn down 10 times more students than they accept. And so they don't have a problem getting
That's the
enrollment.
game of common application.
They want to keep their,
Every university in the country had a much lower acceptance rate when that whole regime came in.
That's right.
So
so they can choose how many students they take every year.
our goal is to pass UConn, not to compare to UConn.
I'm with you there, sir.
Yeah.
I'm with you there. So this slide shows that 13-year trend for each of our revenue sources. Our revenue sources mainly include student revenue, state support, and then, of course, the one-time funds that we receive from the state since the pandemic. From FY13 to FY19, total revenue grew 3.4%. But after FY19, total revenue fell 1.2% per year. The student revenue before the pandemic grew by 2.5% per year, while state support grew by 5% per year. Yet, after the pandemic, student revenue grew a mere 0.7% per year, while state support fell by 3.4% per year. What I'm showing you on the slide with regard to this line showing the downward slope reveals that much of the growth in expenditures at CSU that politicians and state leaders have shared concern about comes from the state supporting our institutions because of the pandemic, as well as using one-time funds to help provide that support. However, since FY24, as you know, we faced the fringe policy change, and that fringe policy change reset not only the expenditures associated with fringe, it reset revenues even more than it reduced the cost of fringe to our institutions. This slide shows the same trend for our expenditure areas. Our expenditure areas mainly include full-time personnel, part-time personnel, other expenses, and fringe costs. Our other expenses, I will get to in the next slide, but you'll see that total spending before the pandemic grew at an annual rate of 3.6%, while after the pandemic, our spending grew a mere 0.5% per year. So we have been controlling spending since FY29. You can see in the sub-bullets that we break full-time and part-time personnel down. You'll see that full-time personnel grew by 1.2% before the pandemic. It grew by 4.7% after the pandemic. That has pretty much everything to do with the wage and non-wage inflationary pressures. Part-time personnel grew before the pandemic at 2.8%, and after the pandemic, that growth slowed. Other expenses before the pandemic grew by 1.6%, but after the pandemic, that rate of growth increased. And the next slide, I'll begin to explain some of that more. And finally, fringe spending, which I've spoken about many times in this forum, before the pandemic increased by 9.8% per year. Since the pandemic, fringe spending has fell by 7.4% per year. So again, while that fringe pressure has been removed by and large, fringe costs still increase. As you can see on the slide with the green part of these bars, the last 3 bars. This is the slide that addresses the other expenses. Other expenses include expenses such as facilities, food service, IT, services, and services includes anything from educational services to legal services to audit and financial management services, general consulting services, and the like. The main point of showing this slide is to show the growth in other expenses for facilities. In FY20, we spent around $33 million for facilities. We spent $33 million of operating expenses for facilities. In FY26, we propose to spend nearly $50 million of our operating budget for facilities. These, yeah, I'll get there in a second.
Okay, you saw it.
These expenditures should be taken care of by bond dollars. These are operating dollars being used to do deferred maintenance, to fix whatever facility problems institutions face. And the fact that we don't get the bond dollars that we should get for these expenditures is part of the reason why it's impacting our operating budget. So this is a concern that I share with all of our CFOs, something that's impacted by the withholding of over $400 million of bond funds that have been approved by the General Assembly, but have not been allocated to our institutions. Professor Cunningham?
Thank you, Dr. Blanchard. Just a quick question. Is there any way to show the regions the breakdown between expenditures in the classroom and out of the classroom? This slide does some of that, but there's more than that that is not on this slide. I think you'll find that the growth of spending generally on payroll outside the classroom is maybe roughly twice the growth of expenditures and investment inside the classroom. I was wondering if your staff has looked at that, or if you could speak to that.
I can speak to that just briefly. We don't have the numbers broken down that way, but it's clear that inside the classroom, the costs include the faculty costs, the IT and equipment costs. And so the IT costs and the equipment costs are shown on this slide. They are relatively smaller relative to the facilities costs, but you're right. The primary costs for other expenses are largely outside of the classroom. Regent Yang.
So I just want to be clear on this slide, right? Because this slide is not speaking about the factor that you just introduced, which is the shifting of budgetary dollars into the operational budget, right? I think it would be good for us to understand on a kind of like-on-like basis the total amount of money that has been spent on some of these services. Because I do believe, say, food services increased because of inflationary costs, like post-pandemic, for example.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
Services costs, right? Labor has increased post-pandemic. But I would like to understand, what our ratio of spending specifically on facilities and on IT is, because I unfortunately don't think either of those things are excellent. I think they're far from excellent, certainly in terms of some of the student-facing things that we have on our campuses. So it is kind of an extra kind of insult to injury, I think, that we have to pile more money onto this, but we're still not getting as good as an outcome as we have gotten in the past for our students, right? So I'd like to know where we are like on like, looking in terms of the dollars that we spend, maybe taking out inflation would be interesting to see. Just again, because again, it seems to me, based upon all the conversations that we've had, that we are not spending adequately maintaining all of our facilities. And I do understand, as you pointed out, a lot of that is because of the bond dollars. But that overall picture that you were alluding to, I think is this slide and more. So just to get that picture clear.
We can provide that for you, Regent Yang, and as well as to other regions.
Do bond dollars cover MRO?
MRO? I'm sorry.
Maintenance, repair, operations?
Bond dollars do cover maintenance.
Do they
They
cover?
cover maintenance and repairs, but I don't think they cover.
They cover, the items need to be capitalizable. So maintenance, no. Operations, no. It's capitalizable being
Repair?
20-year life or equivalent on the
Handlers.
value of the
There's
island.
got to be a GASB standard on MRO, and I would think where those OpEx dollars, are they coming off the balance sheet, coming off a bond fund?
So Keith is right. Bond funds are usually used for things that are capitalized. So repairs of something in this room, on the walls and ceilings.
Can't capitalize that.
We can capitalize repairs.
If
So
we
was
were,
this room?
if it was a rehab of the room, of course.
Over a
It's just,
certain dollar amount or a scale, I would think, but I think what we need, or at least I need, is specificity on where the line is. We know what we need done. We need classrooms that are presentable. We need dormitories that are clean and safe. We need buildings that are good. And then where does it fall? Does it fall into OpEx? Does it fall into CapEx? And then where the source of funds come from? Do the source of funds come from day-to-day operations, or do they come from bond funds, right? Because once we define those things, then we put together what we need done and go up the hill and look for the help on this.
We can do that. We can do that. The way I typically think about the difference between what should be paid for by OpEx or CapEx. If you take the building, if you could take a building and turn it upside down and shake it loose, everything that falls out should be paid for by OpEx. Everything that stays intact with the building is paid for by for bond dollars.
But I think there's a FASB and a GASB standard around this. And the state may have a unique protocol also or a standard around this through the bonding commission. So
we can provide you with.
Let's do that, because I'd like to get this proposal built in terms of priority. When I walk to campuses, people are more than happy to share with me what needs to get done. And I think we could put together a priority list. If we get this much money, then we move down the list here, but I'd like to get that done this summer.
We'll get it done post-haste.
We owe our students and our teachers really good settings to deliver education here.
One of the problem, of course, is the governor hasn't had bond commission meeting where they were giving away bonds. He just has chosen not to do that. I don't have a problem going and requesting that type of thing, but it would be nice to have before us and that I can look at when I go to see, speak in his office, that, look, we need X number of bond dollars, particularly for safety purposes, I think. And we've got some of those facilities, Mr. Chairman, dormitories and classrooms that are really not fit to be taught in or to be lived in and need rehabbing, which could be covered by bond dollars when you're doing that type of thing. I think when you do a total rehab. So I think that's important.
We need to do our homework on this. Our CFOs and our presidents need to help us and guide us as to what the priorities are, what the expected costs are, and then we can package this up. We really need to do the homework as to tell the others how they can help us get this done, whether it's the governor, whether it's OPM, whether it's the legislature, whether it's all the above. I think we need to go in with not a $400 million moment, but here are the bites that come, the priorities, right?
So we do have that. We compile it and reevaluate on an annual basis, working with the colleges and the universities, each institution. I would be glad to share that with you, of course. It's all prioritized and it's set up for multiple years.
So I think there's an opportunity to take a step back, really look at it hard and try and sell it in a different way, because the way we've been selling it, we're kind of stalled a bit, I think, here. And I know that Dr. Toro and Sal Santorino and others had worked with the Western team to do a walk and talk and really had a nice format on how to do this in incremental moments, right? And try incrementally to get this done. Somehow, some way, this is got the cheese is getting old here. The big number, it's getting old each month, each year, and we need to find a recipe to start to move it, right? And we'll help with that.
And Keith failed to tell you that list is there, and it's been there year after year after year for the needs, and it just hasn't been anything done. Maybe we need to reassess that list. And
I don't have a problem with the list. I think how we step back and look at how do we want to get others to help us. I think
Exactly. Obviously, if we've been telling the same story again and again and again, it's not accomplishing results, we should tell a different story.
Yeah. And that's not the definition of insanity. I know the real definition, but it's close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we have questions, starting with Lillian.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Lloyd. I just wanted to add to this contribute to this topic of facilities that something that's missing and absent is the idea of obsolete functionality. So at a campus level, we do all we can to Band-Aid our facilities, make sure the AC is working and the bare minimum. But obsolete functionality is a major concern. Today's students need different type of classrooms. They don't want the fixed chairs. So the building may be working, the air conditioning may be on, but we may really need to rehab and change the functionality of that space. A recent topic here on our campus is the idea that we need to have larger class sizes. We have under 5 classes, physical rooms. So the idea of creating spaces where we teach differently, where classes have flexible seating, those kinds of things are not even reflected when we talk about the facility needs. We are just talking about getting a building functional, but getting a building to also function at an optimum or to meet program needs, future needs, really introduces some other costs that are not really even covered in this topic. And the same applies to technology. I'm new to our campus here, but we really have not incrementally invested in technology. So we find ourselves so behind that it's a really big lift today to actually operate with what we need to be more efficient in our processes. So I think there is some work needed to think about that the idea of obsolete functions, both in facilities, some of the technologies that we are using to do the work that we need to do. So thank you.
Thank you, CFO Wanjagi. Other questions or comments?
Yeah, just another comment. There is a life cycle around these moments, and Keith, you're the expert here, but there's a service life cycle where if you're servicing something 3 or 4 or 5 times, you've already paid for a replacement. There's a technology life cycle, there's a technical life cycle, there's an economic life cycle. And we need to start to do not just diagnostics where things aren't going right, but prognostically going forward where we think these things are going to have to come out. The list is fine. I just think we have to change the way we look to get the funds to help our students and our teachers in these settings.
Understood.
Because I think if we don't change that, it's not gonna move as fast, and we got a lot of help. A lot of people want to help on this.
Absolutely.
May I offer some comments as a follow-up to the previous comment by the chairman?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that I will offer the approach that we use at Central and that we try to suggest and recommend for Western. And this approach of having a list with a number of very expensive projects, I think won't convince anybody. And following the comments from Southern's CFO, the approach we need to take is one in which we connect the strategic priorities in the academic side of things to the investment in technology and physical infrastructure, and start thinking about small projects that we can start getting done in such a way that we can show the state that we know what we are talking about, that we are capable of modernizing our physical and technological infrastructure with not big investments. Because if we continue to wait for those big investments, no updates will happen in decades. And then the students and our faculty will not have what they need to be effective in the classroom and for us to provide a high quality educational experience. I think that I will suggest that we start rethinking the list and the approach to develop the list. I think going back to the state with the same list won't get us anywhere. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, President Toro.
Ted, I think has a comment.
Yep.
Yes, but I think President Toro said it better than I would have. And I just wanted to point out that that is my own experience. I've mentioned this before, but in speaking to people such as Secretary Gilman, as well as others who are building things all over the state, they're almost pleading with us to connect this to strategic and student outcomes because they absolutely want to do it. I mean, she literally was like, I want to build a building. Sorry, Michelle, if you're listening. But you got to help me be able to help you. Right. And then that is about, again, President Toro said it better, connecting it to student outcomes, connecting it to our goals framework, connecting it to what we should be doing here in the state. in terms of providing a modern and awesome education.
Thank you, Regent Yang. Shall we move forward, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, yes, go ahead.
All right. This slide shows the accumulated reserves. You've seen this slide. We spent a lot of time on it at the last board meeting. This slide shows that most of our institutions have been setting aside reserves to prepare for the day when the one-time funds expire. That day has come. And so our proposed spending plans will show how each institution proposes to draw down reserves to help close the gap between their revenues and expenditures. The bottom line with the colored line shows days of current UMP. It's kind of hard to see from this angle, but if you're looking directly at your computer, it shows that we have a new fund balance policy that set a floor of current UMP of 30 days and a ceiling of 90 days. And essentially, what we're showing on the color coding is that Central is meeting that policy. Eastern, Southern, and Western are a bit below the 30-day threshold, and CT State and Charter Oak are above that 90-day threshold. Overall, for the system, we're a little bit above the 90-day threshold, but this is the point in time that is appropriate to begin to utilize our reserves for where appropriate on the operating side as well as for investments. This slide.
Before you go further, I just want to make a comment that, we're talking about bond dollars, we're talking about money from the state. OPM, the governor's office, and the legislature, whether it's true or not, have a feeling that over the last year or two, we've been kind of lax in how we spend our dollars and how we're controlling them. To go back and ask again, which we are going to be doing, for more dollars to improve whatever might be needed, whether it's structural, whether we need it for classrooms, et cetera, is going to be a task that we have to move forward. We need to show those folks that we are in control of our dollars, that we have a list of projects that we need to take care of for the benefit of our students. And that's the main purpose for us being here, our students' improvement, our student education at the best buck they can get. But we need to overcome what they meaning OPM, the governor's office, and the legislature seem to feel we have been lax in, and that's controlling or better control of the dollars we have. I make that statement because having sat there, I know you need to come forward with a plan that looks like it's going to work or going to work. And otherwise, it's going to be see you later. And yeah, we'll consider it and put it on the back burner. And this needs to be on the front burner, not on the back burner. Just a comment that I think is important.
A good point. This is our summer project to pull this together and be ready for when people come back at the end of the summer to propose this. But I haven't yet asked anybody in the state for any money. And I think this is really important for us. And I want to make sure that we have a collaborative effort with our institutional presidents leading the way in what priorities are. Our CFOs engaged. Keith and our team here and Lloyd really involved. It'll be a collaborative effort. And I'm confident, I think Dr. Toro has a lot of wisdom in the approach that we want to incrementally go through this. Because if we need $400 million and we haven't gotten it year after year, do we really need 400 million? Maybe, probably, but I think we need to step back on our approach.
That's good. Good point. Seeing no other hands, the slide that is before you now, before we get to the spending plans themselves, this shows the board framework, strategic framework, ACT, that has guided our institutional budget development. While the development of these institutional KPIs that would support this larger framework are still underway, regents of the committee wanted to understand how our budget proposals that we're going to walk through now, how they are informed by the strategic framework. So what we did was start with the BOR strategic goals, which is the extent to which we have a framework. These goals show there are 9 goals, 3 for accessibility, 3 for completion, and 3 for talent. What I have shown in the next few slides, but I will not discuss here today because our presidents will discuss them next week at the full board meeting, are what the institutions are doing to support each of the board's strategic goals. I've provided this to each of the regents directly, so you will have it in front of your computer and you can read it at your leisure. But I have this for each institution except for Charter Oak, but Charter Oak is certainly prepared to provide a conversation about strategic activities next Thursday. So you'll see this for each of the institutions. I'm not going to go through them. Please read them at your leisure. And I'm going to now get to system offices slides because we are engaging in some strategic activities as well. And at first, I want to turn to Dr. Ainsley Diamond, our Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, to speak to some of the academic initiatives that support the strategic framework. And then I want to go to Leslie Mara to talk about some of the work she's doing for the sponsored programs and special initiatives.
Before you begin, I just want to reiterate a comment that Lloyd and I had a conversation that this presentation of the individual universities on Thursday, next Thursday, that he could do, but it makes much more sense to have each president of the university and the college explain it to the full board as individuals and as the leader of those campuses, rather than having Lloyd do it for them. So I think that's critical. You mentioned it, we talked about it, and that's what we plan on having happen next week. So I'm sure all the presidents will be prepared to explain each of these 9 points to the board next week.
Thank you, Mr.
With
Chair.
that, I excuse me, Doctor, but I wanted to get that in before you began.
That's fine. Thank you all for giving me the chance to really talk about some of the hard work that we're doing at the system office. And I just wanted to start by saying that in academic and student affairs, we tend to be a lot more long-winded. So by all means, feel free to gavel me out or tell me to speed it up. I'm more than happy to do that. I am not going to go through every single goal because the academic and student affairs portfolio is so overlapped. So a lot of these goals just bleed into the next one. So they're combined. But I do want to talk about just starting off strong with accessibility in the first goal here of increasing diversity of students. Many of you have heard us talk about the exponential growth of the Connecticut Automatic Admissions Program. And that program has seen just a lot of success in breaking down gatekeeping barriers to the very first step. Sometimes our students have a really hard time just getting through the application, and they don't realize that they are college-going material because our applications tend to be very burdensome. The CAP program really simplifies this. This was a piece of mandated legislation, and just for perspective, so you know, last year, just our universities went from 3,259 applications, and I just pulled the numbers last night, and we had 15,256 applications. Going into data of enrollment management, applications are great, but what we really want to use as a metric for success is retention. And so that will take at least another year, if not, 3 semesters to really get a handle on how successful this program is. But early days are pointing to great success in that area. The next piece, I will not go into great detail because I will be in front of you at the board meeting, is talking about our dual and concurrent enrollment policy. We have such a wonderful history in this state of K-12 partnerships in the dual and concurrent space. And that also goes into reducing time to degree completion, but also supporting career pathway opportunities as well. So there's been a lot of work in this area about how do we support dual and concurrent as a whole. This language also hit some legislation this session. So we are working in partnership with our institutions. There's going to be a lot more information needed, but we've been working on this for 2 years. So that's coming in front of the board next week. I want to move down to our completion goal, number 5 and number 6. And I want to talk about transfer, which also the 1-year progress report is coming in front of the board next week as well. So just to outline very quickly, because I do not want to steal Steve Marcellinus's thunder in his presentation next week, he's going to be talking about the strategic transfer engagement plan. This seems like really low level, low hanging fruit, but the whole point around the STEP program, as we call it, is to reach the students earlier within that first semester that they are enrolled at CT State, and to ask them, okay, what's the plan? Where are you transferring to? And how can we support that journey? So there isn't a lag time where they're just at CT State and they're thinking, well, maybe I'm doing this, maybe we're doing that. It's strategic advising with transfer as the end goal. So we're using the moniker of plan to transfer 6 institutions, 1 goal. That leads me right into goal 6, which is create flexible pathways to credentials. Last year, you saw the passing of the general education transfer credit alignment policy. This work is really, really big through our system. We were able to secure over $620,000 within the past 4 years supporting these initiatives. The most recent one that I'd love to point out is our affiliation with Arizona State University's Design Accelerator. This is actually the work that really excites me, because we're going and we're talking to the people doing this work. These are the staff members working day to day on transfer and advising. That project culminates with the staff actually doing a Shark Tank kind of presentation to their presidents, where that's where the funding is coming to, which is going to be a great experience for those staff members. The last thing that I want to talk about is these 2 very empty squares under talent. And the reason that those are empty is when CFO Blanchard sent this to me, I was like, this is my entire portfolio under talent, right? So enhancing partnerships to support exponential learning and integrate essential attributes and professional skills into the curriculum. That's in the eye of the definer, right? So we can talk about job shadowing, we can talk about internships, but one thing that I would like to point out is the amazing opportunity that we had 2 Fridays ago, where we brought together the Health Career Council. Those are the 6 representatives from each institution that manage all of our healthcare portfolio. They were downstairs. It was 97 degrees in that room, and each of the healthcare industry partners came in and listened to each one of them talk about their programs. And the conversation that has come out of that and the immediate partnerships that we are starting to see develop has been wonderful. Just to point out in particular, Yale New Haven Health has had a really distinct shift in their organizational management around talent and development. And so they are ready to go. They have an identified need. We have identified students. So it's exciting in all of that space. And I'm going to stop right now. I can keep on going for hours, but you don't want to sit through that. Come to the ASA meetings if you would like.
Ted, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to understand a bit of the context of what was just presented to us. A lot of that seemed backwards looking. Is this also stuff that's going to be continuing? Because specifically, you call CT Health Horizons in a lot of your boxes. My understanding is that program is finished. That was ARPA era money. So is this somehow budgeted for in fiscal 26?
So the Health Horizons activity is supported by grants. And that's why I asked Leslie Mara to come and discuss strategic sponsored activity that supports these specific strategic goals.
Okay, but I just want to, again, clarify, because a lot of what was brought up seemed to be stuff that's already happened, or, good things that we literally just happened, or last week or last month or whatever, right? But this is, again, a forward-looking presentation. I want to be clear that, right? This is not like we're stopping on this. This is stuff that you're providing examples for because you're going to go forward with it.
That's correct.
If I can, CFO Blanchard. Yeah, Regent Yang, everything that I talked about, it literally has just come out of the gates. We've been working on dual and concurrent enrollment. We've been working on transfer for over 10 years. And these are the new initiatives and how we are really moving forward with each and every single one of these. None of these are sunsetting. This is current work.
Okay, so then my question stands regarding Health Horizons, and look forward to seeing how you've found other funding.
He's not there. You can see him. President Maduko, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair Balducci, and regents and fellow institutional presidents and colleagues. I just wanted to speak to, thank you, Dr. Diamond. I do think at a later board meeting, there needs to be discussion about just the concerns and threats we're seeing at the federal level. So I know on this chart, it highlights the Gear Up grant, and the Gear Up grant is an example of what's been flagged by the federal government to be discontinued, right? Though the federal budget has not been finalized, and we wait for that in the fall months, I do think it's important for, our system, board members, presidents, and others to really kind of come up with contingencies as it relates to some of these grant-funded initiatives, though impactful, and though we've seen success across our system. If it does go away federally, what are we going to do? We have seen impacts to federally funded grants directed to students. And we're still coming up with contingencies at CT State to determine what could we potentially absorb to hold our students harmless, but being realistic in terms of some of the things are just financially not sustainable to put on our general budget. So just want to kind of just mention that to kind of just dovetail what Regent Yang was highlighting. There are some things that we don't know in terms of it surviving later on in the year.
Thank you, President Maduko. I certainly agree. There will be some federal actions that will have significant impacts on higher ed, and I am planning to provide an analysis to the regents very soon. And certainly we can try to find time, Mr. Chair, to have that conversation, because I think the impacts will be very significant. Were there other questions?
Other comments?
Let me ask Leslie Morrow to present some of her strategic initiatives as it relates to her strategic and sponsored program areas.
Thank you. And I guess I'd like to address the question first, although that might seem a little out of order. With regard to CT Health Horizons, I chose to highlight that here because it actually covers, I think, 8 of the 9 priorities. And so I chose to highlight that as an example of where the ARPA-funded initiative was a catalyst to new and innovative programming and things that will improve student outcomes. We can go and cross-check all of the items, but the nursing program, for example, that is being stood up at Eastern will continue. So as far as I know, and I'm happy to double check with all the institutions, as far as I know, the institutions that have chosen to seed initiatives with these ARPA funds have intended to do so that they could continue to produce these high demand programs that actually are high demand and high need. So I'm happy though, Regent Yang, to go through and double check to make sure that the initiatives that were part of this initiative will continue. But it is my understanding that the presidents, in choosing the proposals they put forward, were thinking about things, to President Toro's point, things that could be done incrementally that would actually represent innovation in a time of a lot of talk about deprivation. And so I can go through that again and give you an initiative by initiative confirmation. With regard to Gear Up, there has been a little bit of, we have a current Gear Up grant that expires in August of 2026. I mentioned that here because there's some significant opportunity that comes from this cohort of 2,500 students who just graduated high school. And that is that at least 1,100 of them have targeted CT State to be their home next year. We have grant funding to provide them with the support they need to be successful wherever they go, but we want to embed them in our institutions. There are over 100 that I believe have deposits in at Central. So although Central was not a Gear Up partner college, we have been targeting this group of 2,500 students to be ours for whatever their plans take. So I share your concerns, President, about whether I will be writing next year for a Gear Up grant, but I believe that these students are going to become a lasting contribution to us in terms of, and the state. So let me just go back, I guess. In looking at these, my portfolio, which you probably already know, consists of about 8 active initiatives for a total of about $72 million. CT Health Horizons represents 35 of that. Gear Up is 25, and we have others that are in smaller amounts. They don't make the cut for system-wide initiatives until they meet a bunch of the boxes that you have already identified. If they don't allow us to innovate and to do something that we can't do with operating funds, we probably don't have the luxury to choose it, because you're looking at my entire office. And so I feel good about where we stand, and I'm happy to provide the board with a summary of my initiatives and exactly which goals they relate to. With regard to CT Health Horizons, it checks so many boxes in so many ways that I wanted to really highlight it. First, with regard to accessibility, we are working, and I think Central has the lead on this, working with agencies like the Department of Children and Families and others to really improve the diversity of the workforce in areas of social work and nursing. It's a real problem for the state, and it's an area that we think we are uniquely suited to help address. We also, CT Health Horizons does provide student assistance, so it helps with scholarships to make this education more affordable. Several of the programs have been accelerated. So we have an interesting program and with Charter Oak and CT State, where it's a seamless transfer to a BSN. That concurrent enrollment is allowing students to stay attached to that degree and to do so in a more effective and timely way. Employment, the curriculum, all of these are areas that CT Health Horizons directly funds and seeds. And so I wanted to highlight it. I also wanted to highlight with regard to the partnerships. We have done several things that started out as grants. So I started here in 2014 with a grant from the Department of Labor. And we really, this was when Jackson Labs just came to town, and we really wanted them in. And we were told that they were hiring doctorate people and magnificent Nobel laureates and others who were going to be doing all these fancy things. And we went to them and said, if our community college students don't fit, then the state has not made a good investment. And they said, you're right. And so we have had almost a 10-year system partnership with them that began Regent Yang as a grant. And now we are doing joint fund development. So within the last year, we received an NIH grant of about $440,000. And we are working with them and with our community college faculty to develop learning modules that will help our faculty and students to be better prepared in STEM. So I wanted to mention that as a partnership. The last thing I just will always say is I wish the box for number 4 could be made big. Because when you talk about outcomes, I know we can't do anything if we don't do what we have to do in the classroom. I get that. But if we don't address food, if we don't address mental health, and if we don't address the other issues that our students face, we're not going to get where we need to be. So the system office has been the leader with Stop and Shop. We have been the one that got the funding to do the mental health initiative known as JED Campus. And we just received about $1 million to do near peer mentoring across our institutions. So those are partnerships that began small. So Stop and Shop started as $100,000. This year it'll be $184,000. Those partnerships start and they build over time. So I generally don't accept the hook or the looks that I get from Lloyd, because I could keep talking, but I will stop at this point. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to give further detail with regard to how these initiatives will be sustained.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you very much. Any questions for Leslie Morrow?
Just a comment. It's amazing, and I learned a lesson when you told me we have students who come to school hungry or not certain as to where they're going to spend the next night. or whether they've got clothes proper enough to wear for that type of facility, whether it be classroom or in the cold or in the heat or whatever. And I think that direction that we're taking is a positive one, Leslie. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Now it's time for the numbers. And I will try to go through these pretty quickly so that we can leave plenty of time for Q&A and commentary. So this is the FY26 adopted appropriations. It shows the amounts that we requested, $555 million. The governor's recommendation to the General Assembly, $471 million. And eventually the appropriations adopted by the General Assembly, which largely followed the governor's recommendation and added about $7 million. So this is the state support that we are working with. You'll see the state support in the revenue line, in addition to the student tuition and fees. You will see in general, revenues are down $123.8 million. That is solely the result of the lost and expired ARPA funds, the one-time funds. You'll see within the revenue categories, student and tuition fees represent $678 million of revenues for FY26, which is a good 50% or more above state support levels. Other revenues quite small, but you'll see that our expenditures are proposed to be up by $86.1 million. That 86 represents $75 million increase in personnel expenditures and an $11 million increase in non-personnel expenditures. Most importantly, however, we heard the concerns about the accumulated reserves. I mentioned how and why we accumulated those reserves, but we are now here to utilize $144 million of our reserves to support our efforts for FY26. And with this utilization of reserves, we project the resulting $3.5 million surplus system-wide, but in honesty, most of that is our fine university, Central Connecticut State University. And speaking of Central Connecticut State University, their FY26 budget is proposed to be down by $11 million. Their expenditures are proposed to be up by $8.6 million. And Central proposes to use $10.6 million of its reserves for its operating activities, projecting a $3.1 million surplus. Eastern Connecticut State University's revenues are projected to be down $7.5 million in FY26. And their expenditures are expected to be up $17.2 million. While this is a relatively large increase, much of it is explained by the reserves that they are using for capital projects and equipment. They're using $9.8 million of that $17 million for capital projects and equipment. They're using $2 million of that $17 million to absorb previously funded financial aid and scholarships from external sources. And finally, they're using $600,000 of that $17 million to absorb 4 nursing faculty and staff previously funded by grants and 2 new nursing faculty, which is consistent with our strategic efforts. Overall, Eastern Connecticut will use $25 million in reserves. 5.8 of that is coming from System Office, 7 coming from additional support from System Office. Let me back up. That $5.8 million is debt relief. You'll see that there's designations for debt service of 5.8 in FY26. System Office will provide some of its reserves to relieve that expected cost. The additional support is to help them with their budget situation, and they will use about 1.6 million of their own reserves for deficit mitigation, and another 10 million, or rather 10 million within the 17 million for designated purposes, as I mentioned, the capital projects and equipment. Yes, sir.
Well, a lot of numbers. Appreciate it. The 9.8 million for capital and for improvements and repair, can we, even if we approve this budget, not deploy it until we're clear on system-wide how we want to access potentially funds to do that?
Absolutely.
I think it just has to be in concert with our summer project.
I understand.
And I think if it's a need, I haven't talked to President Ismaili about this specific issue, but if there's a need, it can wait 2 months before we get clarity on how we want to approach this bigger moment.
If President Ismaili or CFO Campbell would like to speak to this, I see Jeremy's hand up now. Jeremy?
Thank you. So for these projects, there are some immediate needs that we're going to have to get started on. Example being high temperature hot water line. These are things that can't wait. So we will provide this information to the board, but there are certain things that are already in the pipeline and we're moving forward on because they're types of projects that can't not be completed.
Okay, good feedback. I think we still want to find if we can get these funds paid by others. So you proceed, keep a ledger on the side so we can understand what you're doing and how to do that. But I do want to go back to the powers that be and say, this is, you know, these are for capital, you know, I know it's not MRO, I know, but I think until we get clear, I'd rather go after a big chunk of these dollars.
And we certainly welcome that. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sure you do, Jeremy. Thanks for your hard work.
Of course.
Thank you, Chair Gui.
President Maduk, oh, he lowered his hand. Okay, so President Ismaili, did you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to say that the work that what Chair Gui mentioned is something that we're literally working on right now, which is prioritizing those projects. And as Jeremy just alluded to, there are some that we just have to work on right away.
Clear point well taken. Thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Southern Connecticut State University's revenues are expected to be down by about $15 million. Their expenditures are proposed to be up by $2.4 million. And to close their expected gap, they will use about $14 million in revenue in reserve utilization. You'll see in the transfer section that we will provide debt relief for about $8.2 million. They will use $3.9 million of their own reserves for deficit mitigation, and they will use $2 million of their own designated funds for specific purposes. But they are projecting, with the utilization of these reserves, to balance their budget.
You know what their enrollment assumptions are?
Lillian, do you want to speak to your assumptions?
So yes, we are anticipating an increase of 4.8% enrollment for this fall. Enrollment, we're monitoring that on a weekly basis, and we are actually already at that, and I expect to exceed that number. We've exceeded it actually without the early college, which I know there was lots of discussion and concern about that because there's not revenue associated with that. So we are on track to achieve the revenues that are projected by this budget, and even somewhat exceeded a little bit.
Lillian, thanks for your hard work and welcome to the team. My instincts tell me there's potentially a little more oxygen in your revenue number, but we won't put it in here.
We were being conservative.
I know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I was just going to comment that it's good. I anticipated or I heard about a week ago that enrollment will increase approximately 5%. So anywhere in that's great. The big problem, the big situation, I think, for Southern and the other universities is retention. And that's something we need to work on, retention. It's good to get them in September, but we want them back in January also. So that's just a point that great on increasing enrollment, but now we have to concentrate on retention too. And however that works out, I'd like to hear that response from you folks in general sometime in the early fall.
Thank you. The next slide shows the proposed budget for Western Connecticut State University. Western is expecting its revenues to be up by $18.6 million and its expenditures to be down by $1.2 million. Western expects to use $13 million in reserves, and with the utilization of these reserves, they'll project a small, about $400,000 surplus. In terms of the use of their reserves, they have $5.8 million designated for debt service, and we are proposing to provide $4.9 million in system office reserves to help offset some of those costs. We are proposing to provide additional support from system office reserves to the amount of $7 million for Western. Western is proposing to use 1.5 million of its own reserves for deficit mitigation. And with other designations, small $300,000 worth of designations and transfer to system office, they are proposing a small surplus. So slowly but surely, we are taking the right steps to bring Western back into fiscal balance. Oh, Regent Yang?
Yeah, so I just, I don't really like the use of the word surplus here, right? These are operational deficits, right? Where we have expenses exceeding revenues and we're using balance sheet, okay, to fix that gap. That is still an operating deficit. And I don't really, I don't know why you want to call that a surplus. That to me is confusing, perhaps even misleading to other people around. Now, I do understand that we in our budget, we've been given the very clear direction to use reserves, but we need to not confuse that. Those are balance sheet items that are one-time items, right? Use them, they're gone. That is still an operational deficit. So, but to go back on this, and there's not enough time today remaining or anywhere here. And I forwarded this comment on to the board secretary. But I'd like to understand the assumptions that are driving a bunch of these different things. Now, actually, we know more about Western, thanks to the amazing work by Zomatoro and her team, as well as support from some of the internal staff at Western, as well as I know incoming President Bernal. We know more about them, but I, as I've said and communicated to the Eastern leadership team, we know a lot less. I know a lot less, and I'd like to understand more about the assumptions that are driving their revenue lines. And we have some visibility based upon this budget on the expenditure lines, but the revenue lines and where those are going, right? So this is not, this cannot be done right this moment, obviously. There's not enough time either in this meeting or the information provided, but that is certainly a to-do that I have, and maybe others have as well on this committee and the board, frankly, before I would understand exactly what is being proposed for their budget.
Thank you, Regent Yang. Regent Santiago?
I just want to ask the question that Regent Yang, or confirm what I think Regent Yang said, which is that we're using reserves in every budget here to cover operating costs and quote unquote balance the budget. If that's even the right phrase, but is that an accurate statement? These aren't reserves for one-time capital expenditures. We're using reserves to fill holes in operating deficits in all cases. Is that correct?
That is not correct in all cases, but in most cases, that's correct. Charter Oak and Central are using their reserves for investment purposes and programming. A little bit, there's no deficit to mitigate at Central. There's no deficit to mitigate at Charter Oak. So they're using reserves to make investments. But a lot of this has to do with the legislation that mandated that we use 13% of our reserves each year until otherwise notified. So yes, Regent Santiago, for the other universities besides Central and Charter Oak, they are using reserves to close gaps between revenues and expenditures.
And with a plan to get these institutions on a sustainable footing, or is that to be determined?
I'm sorry, say again, please.
Well, are we using reserves to balance operating deficits with a plan to get on sound financial footing, or with plans yet to be created?
Those plans have been turned in. That's what the 5-year sustainability plan was for, and they will guide how we will both engage in further deficit mitigation through expenditure reduction and/or reserve utilization.
Any other comments?
1 second.
And if I may just, Mr. Chairman, so please, just one point of clarification and then just to reinforce something that Dr. Blanchard said. The 13% reserve utilization was passed by the legislature, and then that was removed in a following piece of legislation. But the idea remains that both the governor and General Assembly very much so want us to use our reserves over the course of this biennium to balance our budgets, including the creation of a subcommittee of the Higher Education Financial Sustainability Board that will also be looking at reserve.
They do want us.
Correct.
Yes, I thought you said don't. I said, no, they do want us because they look like we have, we go back and ask for funding. And meanwhile, we have all of these reserves sitting there and it looks like, we're not willing to help pay our own debt, so to speak.
Yeah, so the reserve conversation.
Yeah.
Continues.
President Ismaili, did you have something to say?
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to follow up on Regent Yang's query. We would really value the opportunity to speak with the regents about the situation at Eastern, our financial picture. But I think importantly, the context in which we're operating, which is important. And as a new president, I think it's also important to discuss the situation that I've kind of found myself exploring over the last 11 months. Which I think would be of interest to the board.
Thank you, President Ismaili.
I had a comment, if I could.
Yes, Professor.
I think it's important that we clarify that these are all projections. There are projections of deficits that need to be covered by reserves. And this is all anticipated. The record would show that over the past 4 or 5 years, our projections have been biased in a pessimistic direction, which has been the reason why we've accumulated reserves at this rate. So it may seem like ex ante, we are planning to use reserves against projected historically pessimistic projections, but ex post, that may not end up being the case. And it's very important that we acknowledge the track record and the fact that we are forecasting the future, and the record of forecasting the future, it does not look very bright when it comes to these kinds of projections. So thank you.
Thank you. The next institution is
I'm sorry, CFO Blanchard, could you just speak to that a little bit directly? Is that an accurate analysis? Have we been over the last several years anticipating operating deficits that have turned into operating surpluses?
We have not anticipated operating deficits that have turned into surpluses. There's one institution, with rather two institutions, three that regularly produce surpluses, and those are the CT State, Central Connecticut State University, and Charter Oak. To the point about pessimistic estimates or pessimistic projections, some may call them pessimistic, others would call them conservative. It is standard for financial professionals to be conservative in their estimates, so that to the extent that any change comes, that change is a good change. Overestimating expenditures is a dangerous practice because you have to sort of deal with negative results that you did not plan for. The pessimism, to the extent that there's any pessimism at all, it is because we knew that the one-time funds would run out. We knew that the state has called for reducing our costs. And so we are moving in that direction. And sometimes we estimate enrollments that don't come in, and sometimes we estimate enrollments like last year, where they came in above our estimates, which was a very positive outcome. So that's what I would say. I think it's a matter of interpretation, but certainly there was a clear expectation for reduced funding from the state, the loss of those one-time funds, and so our projections certainly had that in mind.
Thank you.
So now, this slide covers CT State Community College, whose revenues, expected revenues in FY '26 of $426 million are down $70.8 million, yet they expect to increase their expenditures in FY '26, or proposing to increase them by $56.4 million, partly through the use of $79 million of reserves. So this will, if you look at the transfer section of this slide, you'll see that CT State faces no debt service, so there's no debt relief for them. And since they carry a large amount of reserves, they're planning to use or proposing to use $31.1 million of reserves of their own reserves for deficit mitigation and $48.2 million for other purposes. You'll see on the other designations in FY '25, they faced that negative 48.2. That's basically a $48.2 million surplus that we expect at the end of the current fiscal year. And they have taken that surplus and designated it for spending in the next fiscal year in FY '26. And that's why the same number is positive in FY '26. Again, all that does is take a fairly significant surplus from the end of the current fiscal year and explicitly plans to use it instead of extra state support in the next fiscal year. I would call on CFO Carrie Kelly of CT State to offer additional explanation. Carrie?
Thank you, Dr. Blanchard. I wanted to share with the committee that the anticipated FY '25 surplus is a result significantly more than 60% on the revenue side of the equation. CT State received $8.7 million in additional state support. Additionally, our current year enrollments have exceeded budgeted levels by $9.6 million in tuition and fees. Additionally, we did not forecast the significant amounts of interest income the state has received on the short-term investment fund. That's $8.7 million. We've had small improvements on educational sales and contra revenue, which is essentially students who have outstanding bills with us. That's $2.3 million. On the expenditure side, we've had hiring delays that have personnel and fringe impact. So that's an overall 4.6% variance in the current fiscal year. And similarly, on other expenses, we've outperformed our budget by 3.5%. So cumulatively, this results in a $48.2 million FY '25 surplus that would be utilized for balance in FY '26. I also wanted to clarify that this slide you see before you is for the consolidated community college. That represents 11% of our expenditures are for the system office and shared services. So really, when you look at the expenditures for the college alone, they're really only up about $54 million. And I'm happy to go into greater detail to unpack that as well.
Thank you, CFO Kelly. The distinction between the expenditures for the community college and the shared services here at System Office are in your attachments in the package. You will see one for a consolidated community college and then separately for the college itself and shared services. President Maduko?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Blanchard. I would also want to add, when you're looking at the increases to our expenditures that are primarily personnel related, just for the members of the board on this meeting, earlier in the academic year, we transferred a component of human HR shared services to CT State. So in terms of staffing and also the wages and the expenditures and other costs associated with them. So that was basically added to our ledger. So basically, when you're seeing an increase of this amount. Absolutely, it stands out, but you have to understand there's been shifting of line items to CT State. And then additionally, when you look at new positions that we've hired, in terms of personnel, they are primarily in student-facing infrastructure and public safety areas of the institution. We continue to reduce the number of administrators and continue to prioritize expenditures towards student support and student-facing needs and activities.
Looks like CFO Kelly has put up some numbers for CT State. Do you want to explain those?
Ari has a comment.
That's right. I might get answered here after get this explanation of the numbers.
CFO Kelly? Did you put these up?
She's
Yes, I did. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. So I just wanted to share with everyone, when looking at the increases in personnel, we'd like to unpack those a little bit. 14.2 million of that is because of some of the delays in hiring and in the current fiscal year. So when comparing FY26 to FY25 results, we have to factor in and recognize that many positions are being hired as we speak, particularly around public safety. Those were budgeted for the majority of the fiscal year, but it takes almost 11 months to recruit SMORE officers, as well as some of our maintenance staff. So in the classified union, so there were significant delays there. The cost of the wage increases are anticipated to be approximately $14.7 million, as well as the fact that we have provided $3.8 million in the upcoming fiscal year for our strategic priorities. And as President Maduco alluded to, the transfer of HR recruitment and talent back from shared services to CT State. To unpack the additional new positions that are contained in the budget, there are 37 new positions that total $2.4 million. They break down as follows, right? So we have 7 new positions at Danbury, 3 new positions in manufacturing at our Spring Lane facility. We have additional positions at the Center for New Media, additional faculty positions, and we're enhancing human resources with the addition of 9 positions. So that's how it all shakes out.
Ari, now you have a question, Ari?
Yeah, so I think I noticed on the slide that CFO Blanchard was showing earlier, it was over a $50 million year-over-year personnel increase. And then the last slide showed 37. And so I'm just trying to understand, did I not see an over $50 million? I think it was a 351 to 403 million year-over-year personnel increase at CT State. Did I see that right? That slide's not on the screen currently.
That sounds right, Regent Santiago. But I believe the slide that Carrie just put up will help you with that explanation. Carrie?
Right, so in attachment F, you can see that the college is broken down into 3 component parts. The college itself represents about 89% of expenditures. 11% of our expenditures are in shared services and system office. This shows the increase between FY25 and 26 between the 3 component units broken down for personnel. So of the 56 million that CFO Blanchard had, about 54 million of that is attributable to the college. The rest is attributable to shared services and system office. And on the personnel side, combining wages and fringe benefits at the college, that amounts to 49.3 million. 37 of it is on the personnel side. 12.6 is the fringe benefit changes. We received direction from the state comptroller that the employee medical costs were anticipated to increase. So not only are the base costs increasing, but also when you have higher expanded personnel costs, the results are increased fringe benefit costs as well.
Yeah, it was the large fringe add-on that I don't think I anticipated. So I appreciate that color. Thank you for anticipating those level of detail, CFO Kelly. Very helpful.
Thank you, CT State. So we'll move on to, I think, one of the last slides. Charter Oak State College. proposes for their FY 26 budget to, they expect to face a $0.8 million decrease in their revenues. And they are planning to increase, or they're proposing to increase their spending by $2.3 million using $1.3 million of their reserves. As Charter Oak moves forward with some of the more strategic initiatives, they plan to use these reserves to fund new programs. Any questions about Charter Oak? And finally, System Office Shared Services expect to face $700,000 increase in revenues and increase of $1.2 million in expenditures. Revenues will be enough to cover our expenditures. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions you may have or hear whatever comments you may wish to share.
President Maduko?
Is this President Maduko, is your hand still up? Oh, it's now down.
It was a ghost legacy hand. My apologies.
No problem, sir. Love hearing from you. Other questions or comments? Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much for that. I
think we want to go to an executive session.
Yeah, no, well, we had the debt service.
Oh, I'm sorry, the debt service, yeah.
Moving right along, and the last item before we go into executive session is the debt service relief. And then now I'd like to just turn that over to you for the final discussion before we go into executive session, Lloyd.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As I went through those spending plan slides, I alluded to each time where we have the universities have debt service each year, and we are proposing to use System Office reserves to provide debt relief as one way to spend down elevated levels of System Office reserves and to also support our institutions by giving them operating budget relief. So the reason why we're continuing with the transfers and asking the board through a separate resolution, so there will be a resolution for the spending plans and a separate resolution for taking $28 million from our STIF account, which is part of our reserves at the System Office, and refunding those to the universities. Now, some universities have more debt service than others, so our plan was to refund those expenditures that were consistent and similar across the 4 universities. So what you will see and consider for a vote next Wednesday and Thursday is a separate resolution that will allow us to extract $28 million from the STIF account and reimburse the universities only, for the debt service payments for their dormitories and some of their parking garages to reimburse for those costs. And this serves to give them some help to balance their budgets with the additional support that we're providing at least Eastern and Western with the additional $7 million of support for FY26. So this is part and parcel of the spending plan, but it will have to be approved separately based on conversations the general counsel and I had with Chifa, who owns these, who's the lender for these funds, and the Office of the State Treasurer. Any questions about debt service relief? Regent Yang?
So I guess I'm confused as to why this is on the table. I do understand that we have reserves. We want to get those reserves to the campuses where they belong. But this is kind of backward looking, right? And, you know, you and I have had this discussion with other people, for example, about institutional support, i.e. scholarships, right? And other things like that, and how we are lagging behind that. And, you know, reducing the affordability to our students who most need affordability of our tuition. And, you know, so to me, it's kind of like, why are we backwards looking, you know, kind of doing debt relief or debt forgiveness or whatever we're talking about here, relief, I guess, right? Because of the interest, right? Why is this on the table? as opposed to using our system office reserves to directly help students with something like scholarships?
Because that's a very good question. Thank you for it. $89 million of the $129 million we have at system office reserves are strictly for debt service. They are bound by the debt covenants that we have with Chifa. And so they cannot be used for financial aid or any other purpose. They can only be used for debt service and capital. So what we are doing is using those reserves for debt service and capital, an allowable expense. And then what that does is free up operating room for the institutions, which they can use more flexibly. So they can use that relief, if you will, for financial aid or other purposes that are strategic in nature.
Okay, so just to replay that, the prior presentation to the board about system office reserves and reserves in general, there was kind of like a free $30 million number, right? Roughly.
That's the $30 million number. That's right.
Okay. And so now you're talking about, this is not part of that free $30 million number. This is part of the other number where there's covenants, or however it works with our relationship with Chifa.
No, the $30 million is all debt service funds. And when I say
it's all debt service. Okay.
Sorry?
It's all debt service funds. Okay.
The $30 million is from the debt service fund. The 10 million and 10 million, 10 million for 26 and 10 million for 27 that I showed at the last board meeting would come from more undesignated system office reserves.
All right. I see. Okay. All right. So in other words, we're doing what we can to get this back on the campuses. So then if this is something that the regents do feel is important, I for one feel is important, maybe something we can brought up. I don't know the right forum to do this, although it probably should have been done earlier, is something that we can talk about when we move to approve this and we move to have the full board meeting, i.e. my desire for this to be used for institutional support.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We're then, I'm missing something. One of the proposals that I had, and I think you were in agreement, and I think Ted also and others, is scholarship or financial aid dollars. We're talking about $5 million of that coming out of reserves. Where and when does that, how do we make that happen? Maybe I just, now I'm going around.
So they're go ahead, Ken.
We're still talking about this, the treasurer's office, stiff.
We're talking about how can we get at financial aid, which is another area of investment the board wanted to consider. So if you want to talk about the debt service fund, please go ahead.
Yeah. No, if that's clear to everybody, that the debt service fund is money that has already been, so the institutions are going to continue to pay their debt service annually. We have accumulated more money than is required for good practices. So we are working with the treasurer's office to have that money refunded to us for use going forward. So it's money that's been put away in the past for use going forward. And those are not spoken for as of yet, other than to the 4 universities who put the money in there.
So let me see if I can be clearer, or not clearer, but another way to express it is, if we wanted to use system office debt service funds to support our universities, we could have simply relieved them of the transfers to system office in FY26 and make the debt service payment from the debt service fund itself of $28 million, which is near the $30 million we showed on the slide last meeting. The Office of the Treasurer and Chifa wanted us to not use that approach, but to use the approach that sustains the transfers so that we don't add risk to the debt service practice in general, but to have a separate resolution for the board to approve to provide that relief from the debt service fund. So we're going to spend down $28 million from the debt service fund to make the 26 payment, and we're asking for $28 million to be given back to the universities under a separate resolution. That has the effect of relieving them of the debt service for those items.
Okay, how about my question about scholarship money?
For scholarship or money. So in the last meeting, when I said we were gonna use $30 million for debt service, $10 million for other initiatives, and another 10 million in FY '27 for other initiatives, that $20 million was sort of the room that we were gonna use. It was determined, well, it was suggested to me by the chair of the board that we support efforts at Eastern and Western. However, there are other undesignated funds at system office that we can consider for financial aid. I have not included it.
That's $6 million.
That's $6 million. That's right.
So we could take that 5 out of that 6 if we wish.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And to be clear also, we set aside 15 million for the implementation and the move from Banner to Banner SAS. Regent Yang will govern that process through the tech committee, which will begin in about 30 minutes. I'm simply holding the funds until he approves that effort in tech committee and the board approves the spending of system office reserves to support that effort. So 15 million is being set aside for the Banner implementation. 6 million is left. We can use any part of that 6 million for financial aid.
That takes, I thought that's where we were. I just didn't hear it said. I like to hear it said.
I appreciate that. Regent Yang, did you have another question?
Just I think the 15 million, just specifically that you're proposing in the technology committee is for the migration, not the core Banner. But anyway, that point is taken. I did see a line item for use of scholarships that was allocated to one of our institutions. I won't call out which one. So you're saying that was a mislabel, perhaps, that we just need to address that?
No, that scholarship came from one of the institutional reserves. I believe it was.
Oh, you mean from that school itself? Okay, fine, understood. Understood.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions about the debt service relief? I know it's a little convoluted, but Karen Bufkin, our general counsel, did great work on our behalf, worked with the Office of the Treasurer, the Chief organization, and their legal counsels to figure out a way that we can do that would satisfy what we were trying to do from a relief standpoint and satisfy the covenants of CHIFA in our bond agreements.
Awesome. Okay.
That's all I have, sir.
That's good. As we move right along, and we're going to go into executive session. And I've got to read this, I guess. Before I call a motion for to move in executive session, let me state that the members of the Technology Committee will move to executive session in accordance with 1-206E and 1-210B7 of the general statutes. No votes will be taken in executive session. Additionally, no action or vote by the committee following executive session. The only remaining item will be an adjournment of the meeting. I would ask Keith Epstein, Lloyd Blanchard, Karen Bufkin invited into executive session. Adam Joseph.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes. Bring something. Into executive session as they have testimony or opinions that may be and will matter to the attendance. Therefore, allow me to make a motion to move an executive session for the purpose described above. And is there a second to the motion? Thank you. I appreciate that. Second motion made and seconded. Discussion, hearing none. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Move into executive session and the live stream should end, I believe, correct?
And so
It'll just take a moment to end the live stream.
So we'll thank our presidents and our CFOs for their attendance today. Regents,